All right, today we're going to go ahead and talk about how to solve quadratic equations. Now, there are two different ways to go ahead and solve quadratic equations. And the first one we're going to talk about is called completing the square. Now, completing the square works for all quadratics. So we've learned already how to solve quadratics by factoring and using the zero product property. And we've solved quadratics by going ahead and using our calculator to find where it crosses the x-axis. But we're going to need a better way, a way to do it algebraically. And there's two ways to do it, completing the square, which is today's, and tomorrow's, which is quadratic formula. Now, both work all the time, and there are times when completing the square is easier, and there's times where quadratic formula is easier. I don't care which one you end up going ahead and doing more often than not. That's a personal choice. But I'm going to show you both of them. So we'll do this one first. This one has a lot of different steps in order to go ahead and do that. And then tomorrow's is a little bit more of a formula, and obviously we'll talk about that at that point. So let me walk through the steps here, and then I'm going to obviously do a problem to walk through the steps. All right, remember all quadratics are in the form ax squared plus bx plus c. So the first step is to move c to the other side, the constant, the number without an x. That gets moved to the other side of the equation. Then if there is an a value, we divide by a. And then 3, 4, and 5 are kind of like on the side. We take b, which is the middle term, and divide by 2. We're going to square that result, and then we're going to add that result to both sides. Then we'll factor the left side, take the square root of both sides, and then solve both of them. That may not sound, you're probably pretty confused at this point, and that's fine. We're going to go ahead and take a few moments just to look at these middle 3, 4, and 5 here. Just take a look at this middle steps. We're going to do an example on that, and then we'll do a whole example, and I'll walk you through it. All right? So we're just going to refer back to this just to kind of have an idea of how we're going to go from one to the next. All right, so we're going to do this 3, 4, 5. So we want to find out, here's our A, B, and C. We're going to figure out what goes in this C value in order to go ahead and make this factorable. Because look at here, number 6, we say we want to factor both sides. We are going to force it to be able to factor, just like we forced our complex number. We forced it to cancel out on the denominator by doing something specific. We're going to do the same thing here, and that's what those 3, 4, and 5 steps are about. We're going to make it perfect, okay? And that's a part of how we complete the square. All right, so we're going to take this 12, and here's step 3. We take 1/2 of 12, so 12 divided by 2 is 6. Then we're going to take that number 6 and square it, which is 36. And 36 is the number that we're going to have to add in order to make this a perfect square. And what I mean by that is this can be factored. Remember, we do two things that multiply to 36 that add to be 12. And it's 6 times 6. It's always going to be a perfect thing. It's going to be exactly the same number both times. And it's actually going to be this number always, what you get up here. They're kind of the same thing. And so what does that mean? This can be rewritten as x plus 6 squared. So that's what step 6 is. So we're always going to set it up so that we get a perfect answer here. It will always work out. Not everything can be factored, but by doing it this way, we are going to force it to be factored. Okay? All right, let me go through a whole step of one. All right, so here's our original equation. X squared plus 4x minus 12 equals 0. I don't know why that one came up early. All right, so what we're going to do first is we're going to move c. So the c is this number over here, and we're going to move it to the other side. So we're going to add 12 to both sides. So I put 12 over here, but there's going to be a number we've got to put in here to force it to be correct. And that's what we're going to look to do. That's what we kind of did here, that middle steps, all right? So the first step is to move that over and create these kind of a blanks. That's going all the way back here. That's step 1, move c to the other side. Now step 2 says divide by a. We're lucky because this problem doesn't have an a in front of it. There's no a in front of this, so we don't have to do that step. We don't have to divide. So now we're doing that whole middle part. And what do? We take this middle number here, 4, or a b value, and we're going to divide by 2. So 4 divided by 2 is 2. And then we square it. 2 squared is 4. So that number that we get is what we add to both sides. because if I do it to one side, I've got to do to the other. So that's why I put the plus 4. So we're going to add 4 to both sides. And now this here on the left side is perfect. And what number multiplies to 4 and adds to 4? Well, it's 2 and 2. Again, we're always going to get that 2 and 2, so it's squared because it's the same thing. We could write this out as x plus 2 if we wanted to. All right, we don't have to. We want to write it this way. 12 plus 4 is 16. Now, so once we factored it, we go ahead and take the square root of both sides. We're back down here now on step 7. So we divided by b, divided b by 2 and got the 2, squared it, got 3, added to both sides, factored. Now we're down the square root. Now it says remember plus or minus. Whenever we take the square root of both sides like this, whenever we take the square root of both sides, we're going to have to do a plus or minus. So this 16, what's the square root of 16? Well, the square root of 16 is 4, but I have to put that plus or minus in there. Notice on the left side here, it's x plus 2 squared. We got rid of that. And now it's just x plus 2, plus or minus 4. Now we're going to have to solve both of them. Plus or minus, what that means is one answer is positive 4 and one answer is negative 4. So we have two different answers here. We will always get two answers. Remember, our quadratic is U-shaped, so it crosses the axis twice. We're going to get two answers. So I subtract the 2 over. So I have negative 2 plus 4, negative 2 minus 4, or 2 and negative 6. And that's how we do this algebraically. Let's do some more. All right, so here's our original problem. X squared plus 6x plus 8 equals 0. Now I have to move the 8 over, and when I do that, it's negative 8. I put these blanks here just to help myself out, to know that I got to add something there. So now I take my b value, my 6, divide by 2 is 3. 3 squared is 9. That's what I get to fill in the blanks with, 9 and 9. All right, now that I filled in 9 and 9, this adds up to be 1. And now I factor this. What numbers multiply to 9 that add up to be 6? Well, it's 3 and 3. Again, it's always going to be this number, whatever you get when you divide. It's always going to be that number. So it's x plus 3 squared. Take the square root of both sides. So it's x plus 3 equals plus or minus 1. So now I'm going to subtract 3 from plus or minus 1. So it's a positive 1 minus 3 and a negative 1 minus 3. Positive 1 minus 3 is negative 2. Negative 1 minus 3 is negative 4. Try another one. All right, this is one that the a is there, so I'm going to have to divide. This is where completing the square sucks, because completing the square is going to give you fractions at this point. Okay, so it is really, this is the part where it's bad. This is why I like the quadratic formula better, but there's quite a few people that like completing the square better. All right, doesn't really matter. So we're going to move that 1 over. So they took their moment, they did it afterwards, they moved it over afterwards. You could really switch 1 and 2 around. So they divided by 3. X squared has to be by itself. So we divided by 3. So 2 divided by 3 and 1 divided by 3 and 0 divided by 3. Then you move the 1/3 over. And we're still going to go ahead and try to fit that in. So what do we have to do? We have to divide it by 2 or multiply by a half. That's negative 1/3. 1/3 squared is 1/9. So that 1/9 is what we get to add to both sides. See how these fractions are going to get kind of messy? That's why the completed square can get messy, especially when there's a value in front of the x squared. The other ones are pretty straightforward. This is where it kind of starts to get messy. All right, not a big deal. We can do it. If you don't, you can always just type this in your calculator. Remember, you can hit math, enter, enter to see what your answer is as a fraction. So if you do 1/3 plus 1/9 and then hit math, enter, enter, it will give you the answer for that. So over here we factor it, it's 1/3, and over here we get 4/9. Take the square root of both sides. Well, square root of 4 is 2, square root of 9 is 3. So now we have to just add 1/3 to both sides, so it's 1/3 with the plus or minus 2/3. So it's 1/3 plus 2/3 and 1/3 minus 2/3. 1/3 plus 2/3, that's just 1, and this is negative 1, so those are my two answers. All right, here's another one. So move the 15 over and then divide by 2. So I move the 15 over, it's negative. Divide everything by 2, so we have 11 halves and negative 15 halves. Now here's the messy part. 11 halves divided by 2 and squared is 121 fourths. Okay, again, this is where it gets really messy, but I can put that in a calculator. 121 fourths and negative 15 halves gives me 91 fourths. And again, I factor this, square root it. So I have x plus 11 fourths plus or minus square root of 91 over 2. And then I move that negative 11 fourths over. I can't do anything with this. This is a square root, this is not. I can't put these together. So the nice thing about that is I'm just going to leave it. If 91 can be reduced, I do want to do that, but it can't, so I won't. And that's my answer. All right, let's try this one. This one's back to a little more easy because there's no a here. So I'm going to move the 11 over. And so it's negative 11 over here. Now I'm going to take this 4, take that 4 and divide by 2. Divide by 2 and square it. So divide by 2 is 2, square it is 4. So I'm putting 4 on both sides. This factors perfectly, x plus 2 squared. This is negative 7. Now if I take the square root here of negative 7, this is why we learned about complex numbers. Because if I take the square root of a negative number, what kind of answer am I going to get? I'm going to get an I. So I have x plus 2 equals plus or minus the square root of negative 7. So that negative 7 becomes I root 7. And then I'm going to subtract the 2 over, minus 2 plus or minus I root 7. And again, this is a square root and this is not, so I'm not going to do anything with it. I'm just going to leave it like that, and that is actually my two different answers. Negative 2 plus I root 7 and negative 2 minus I root 7. You can write it out separated like that, or you could have left it like this. I would take it either way. That's what I have for you today.